You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome. I'm Esther Awuni. Many thanks for joining us. On today's show, we'll explore General Electric's journey in Africa. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also send your thoughts and your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awuni. Now, it's been 120 years since General Electric set foot on the African continent, with Johannesburg in South Africa playing host to their first overseas office outside the US, with businesses spanning across key sectors like power, aviation, and healthcare. Farid Fzoua, GE's president and CEO for Africa, joins me to take us down memory lane and discuss the impact the company has had on development outcomes in Africa over the 120-year period. Farid, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hello, Esther.
120 years in the African market. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for GE?
Well, first of all, Esther, it's 120 years is more than a lifetime, as we know. But it's true, and we're quite proud because you know that Thomas Edison founded this company. First, to have the first overseas branch of the General Electric company in 1898 being set up in Africa in itself is a huge pride for all of us that are in Africa and work in Africa and are Africans. And, it's been 120 years of contribution to innovative technology. Since the beginning, we brought the first X-ray machine in this continent. We started electrification and our journey on electrification very early. We have had a commitment to localization and diversity as well from the very beginning. And I would say over the years, we've kind of made a strong commitment towards sustained and sustainable development through partnership with both the governments of Africa, but also the private sector of Africa. So if you fast forward from the 1898, which we did open our first branch in Johannesburg in South Africa, we kind of exited South Africa during the period of apartheid for the right reasons, and we came back in this country in 1995, but through the 120 years we set foot and expanded our footprint across the continent of Africa. Fast forward today, we've kind of tripled our presence, particularly over the last 11 years, throughout the sub-Saharan Africa, with more than 1,000 employees spread out in key hubs, what we'll call hubs, Nigeria here in Lagos being one, South Africa, Kenya, more recently in Francophone Africa in Côte d'Ivoire. So it's been a journey of partnership, of contribution and commitment to infrastructure development throughout the country.
Now, obviously, it is safe to say that if there is one company that knows Africa in and out, it's GE. Because Africa has come from that time, like you said, where, it was continent, they called the dark continent, there was conflict, prevalence of diseases, even, especially the preventable ones, and a lack of, widespread democracy, et cetera, so many issues. But we've seen the African story, the African narrative change to one of being a frontier of opportunities, even across various sectors. So obviously, you've sort of had a front seat view, as it were, and also perhaps, maybe in some areas, first mover advantage. So when you talk about being part of, this being part of Africa's sustainable economic story, etc., could you give us one or two examples in terms of how you've been part of that when that narrative changed to where Africa now became this, center of attention, as it were, at least for foreign investors? You were right there. So talk to us when you having that front seat and what that means for you.
Well, I would first say that from the very nature of what GE is, a company that has set technology and solutions around power, around healthcare, around aviation, and for a long part, transportation and oil and gas, which are two companies that have been part of the GE Group for a long time, including in Africa. So when you look at that, particularly power, in this continent, you still have more than 650 million people without access to electricity. The continent is still home for 25% of the global disease burden here in Africa. So our healthcare focus couldn't match the needs of the continent. Same thing for aviation and transportation. We still have a lot of our parts of the continent that are locked due to the inability of freely or more conveniently moving people and goods from one country to another. So I would say there is a natural match between what GE produces as solutions and what the needs of the continent have been, and to a large extent are still today. More importantly, I think, and I touched on that, 10 years ago, we decided really to go local and to build our own capabilities within the company, growing our own GE talents. And it goes from field engineers that will service turbines in Nigeria or in South Africa, to healthcare specialists that will develop capabilities in clinical application on our CT scans or MRI machines or ultrasound, to our ability to grow through partnership the capabilities within our customers. And we have made a strong commitment towards capability building, skills development, meaning local skills development within the ecosystem of these various sectors that I've mentioned. Today, we're proud to say that we have been able to set local capability building centers, from training center in health in Kenya to MRO, which is maintenance and repair shop on aviation in Ethiopia, okay. And also huge capabilities and service in gas power, steam power, and lately more renewable around hydro and wind in the various parts of Africa.
Okay, let's talk about, I want us to narrow this down. Let's talk about Nigeria.
Yes.
GE has been in Nigeria somewhere around 40 years.
40 years.
So that's a significant amount of time. To talk to us about, impact investing, the impact, how your presence here in various sectors has impacted on economic growth, if you will. I know that for Nigeria, power is a very big problem. Yes. Also. I mean, if you just think about the size of the population, and especially in the rural areas where, right. That is still, the numbers are still quite abysmal. Talk to us. I know that you just talked about that a few minutes ago, that company-to-country agreement that you signed with the Nigerian government, bringing, of course, more local. But just talk to us, those key sectors, especially, I'm interested to know your investments in power, the kind of partnerships you've had, and perhaps also impact that we've seen.
Yes, and indeed, our history with Nigeria goes more than 40 years in terms of history. And one of the key elements of collaboration that we chose with Nigeria is really looking at the bigger picture, that what we call a country-to-company agreement under the form of memorandum of understanding was really meant at working together with the federal government to alleviate the issues around power and around health particularly. And if you look at what we've done within this framework, has been to contribute to the development of new capabilities, particularly on the generation side, in terms of power and gas power in particular. Now, the history of GE in terms of the installed base of generation was already big. We have 9 gigawatt of installed base capacity in terms of powering that capacity here in Nigeria. But we also made a commitment to contribute to 10 gigawatt additional in terms of capacity add-on, which we're very proud over the years, and particularly the last 10 years, to have contributed within an independent type of production model, what we call the independent power projects, to have power more than 4,000 megawatt of these new capacity. So only that contribution in new build and new generation, adding capacity to generation, is a huge one. But within the existing install base, we've also developed and localized the capabilities to service, maintain, and work on the productivity and the efficiency of that existing install base. And as such, we usually think about what can we add, what can we build new, but we often forget about how can we make the existing more efficient, more productive, extending capacity thereby. So that's been one, but it's not the end of the journey on power, because one of the key themes is how do you get power distributed to where it needs to be consumed. And the whole element around transmission, distribution, around grid solution is something that with Nigeria and within Nigeria over the last few years, we've also started working very closely to provide the right solution and unlock, the capacity of the grid to distribute that power.
Okay.
And that's going to be a big commitment, working with the government, but also with the private sector.
If I may, if I could just come in here, yes, we have seen those investments, those partnerships, but if you look at the Nigerian power industry, especially post privatization, of course, issues around between generation up until distribution, the last mile,
yes,
obviously still a bit cumbersome. As a private sector, just taking a look at perhaps that, and then thinking about maybe if you've had businesses with similar economies with similar power issues, those lessons that you see that you've learned, or that perhaps we can also learn in terms of how we continue to fix our power issues despite all the investments and the help and the partnerships that continue to be put on the table. I mean, what do you see? What have you seen? What are your takeaways from how peculiar this power market here in Nigeria is?
Well, I would say, the one thing that Nigeria has for itself is definitely not a lack of natural resources. So there is fuel in this country, there is gas, and the ability to have that fuel, which is gas that can power a lot of the capacity going forward, is already a key asset that Nigeria has as a country. Now, the need to look at the holistic, I would say end-to-end type of solution and the question about power from the fuel, that is really the gas that will fuel these power generation units, and then be able to distribute and enhance the capability of the grid through a country that is large geographically, where the population is quite dispersed around the country, is the key question.
Okay, Farid, I must thank you for your time so far. We're just going to pause here and take a quick break and come back and pick it from where we left off. If you're just joining us, Farid Fzoua, GE's President and CEO for Africa, is our guest today on Beyond Markets, and we're discussing 120 years of General Electric in Africa. Farid, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you.
Let's talk about another key sector, and here also in Nigeria, and that's healthcare. Talk to us about General Electric's footprint in this sector, especially the kind of key partnerships and investments you've made so far.
No, absolutely, Esther. I touched on the access to electricity on the continent, but healthcare is another major priority for most of the countries of Africa, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa. And in that space, particularly in this country, in Nigeria, we've been able to partner with the government and as well as some of the state governments to really bring innovative solutions on the primary healthcare space. At a time when we're talking about universal health coverage, building national insurance scheme, there is an imperative to build a very strong, efficient primary care level, which is where typically patients and people would go as the first post to seek a quality healthcare. And over the last few years, we've been able to work together with the Borno state, Kaduna state particularly, launching a rehabilitation program and modernization of the primary and district level healthcare facilities, which are aimed at combining, of course, what we do best, which is innovative technology. And in that case, these are technologies for diagnostic that are placed at the right level of care and that are combined with a continuous training scheme, because what we have found in the past that unfortunately a lot of technology are being installed in hospitals, but very little time or very little resource is invested into the people that use this technology. And so we decided to change that and combine technology, continuous training, and also long-term service and maintenance, which is key to the sustainability and the efficiency of these operations. So, 3 years into the programs, and we're able to start measuring impact on the way healthcare is delivered at very primary care level. And we're looking to expand those kind of models across Africa. We have today developed 17 of those programs across 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and really looking to scale up that model, because this is about providing quality care at a price level and at a cost level that enables the national insurance scheme to pay for it and to contribute to it.
I'd like to hear your perspective on this, because I know that healthcare, having better healthcare outcomes on a continent, is also part of the of Africa's economic development agenda.
Yes.
If one thinks about 2060, the economic agenda. And I know that there's been a lot of investments over the decades that have gone into the healthcare.
Yes.
When I talk to healthcare experts, healthcare analysts, what they usually tell me is, look, we need more private sector investment.
Sure.
Obviously, the government cannot do it alone. Just your thoughts on that, the level of private sector, working as a player, as a private sector, just what you see on the ground in terms of the amount of private sector involvement or participation that you're seeing on the continent, and if perhaps that is one of the major problems why we still do not have those good healthcare outcomes that we need on the continent.
So for healthcare, you're right. The involvement of the private sector is key. I think this is a lesson that globally has been learned. Healthcare does not exclusively belong to the public sector. Actually, where it has shown the best results is when the private sector and the public sector are able to collaborate in a sustainable manner and in a smart manner. And it is a combination in healthcare of a few stakeholders. We are a technology company and we provide diagnostic imaging type solutions to hospitals and healthcare facilities, but we cannot and we do not operate clinically a healthcare facility. So this would be ministries of health operating those hospitals or clinics or radiology centers, or this would be a private healthcare provider. What we've seen is when there is a good combination of private sector stakeholders like a GE Healthcare with a private healthcare provider working with a Ministry of Health to deliver the best possible quality and standards of care at the right cost point, because it needs to be accessible to the largest number, then I think this is where we succeed. And I think this is the kind of things that we need more of. We need private healthcare providers having the strategic intent and the courage to come and to develop their activities across Africa. Because we see some private healthcare providers that have activities in some countries but are kind of shy over time to move into other tougher place. Could be the primary and rural care area, could be some places in Africa that do not have the level of infrastructure that they would expect. But I think this is where it takes courage to challenge yourself. We've done it as a GE company. That's why we decided to really localize our capabilities, because without local capabilities, without your own local talents that live on the continent, that are from the continent, that understand the culture and can work on the continent, you are not able to deliver on that kind of models and scheme in a long
I'd
time.
like to hear your thoughts on, there's something that's gathering a lot of momentum on the continent, is entrepreneurship.
Yes.
We've seen more support for small and medium scale enterprises. I mean, we have over 17 million of them in Nigeria alone, and of course,
and they're very vibrant.
Very vibrant, and we're seeing that emerging momentum also, especially in the tech, within the tech space. And I know that GE, you're also involved in supporting small businesses, specifically through the GE Lagos Garage. Could you just tell us more about it? What do you see, and what kind of inspiration do you see coming from these young men and women who you see trying to, make these businesses succeed in a very tough environment, but still hopeful, because it's not all doom and gloom. There is some help coming.
Well, we have that experience that we kicked off in 2016 that is still ongoing, the Lagos Garages, which really act as, I would say, an incubator of capability building and skills development, particularly in this case around the advanced manufacturing technologies like 3D printing, laser cuts, but where we have trained almost 600 young Nigerian entrepreneurs to these new techniques of manufacturing. But over time, we also felt that we created a forum for these entrepreneurs to, of course, learn the advanced manufacturing technologies and apply that to their own businesses or their own ventures. But it also created a momentum around innovation and around cooperation and collaboration within the private sector itself. And I was recently here in Lagos at an award ceremony where we recognized some of our entrepreneurs that have gone through the training program. And it was quite, clear to me that beyond the skills development or the training itself, we had created some kind of emulation around, how do we take entrepreneurship to the next level in Nigeria? How do we integrate that within the global entrepreneurship dynamics? And how do we import and apply these new technologies, new models into enhancing the efficiency of the private sector?
And speaking about new technologies, new models, when I've heard people, when talking about the fourth industrial revolution, they say, Africa may lag, and others also tell me that, look, Africa also has the opportunity to leapfrog, as it were, in some areas, either in AI or robotics, etc. What do you think?
I think it does, and particularly when we think about some of the elements of the fourth industrial revolution, like artificial intelligence, applied intelligence, additive manufacturing, we talked about that. But just take artificial intelligence. I think you remember the telecom industry, and particularly the 3G industry on this continent, did a massive leapfrog. We completely flew over the milestones that Europe or the US have taken decades to go through. I think we can do the same with AI and some of the advanced innovation like this one. I take an example on healthcare. We, as GE Healthcare, just achieved the first FDA-approved X-ray artificial intelligence application on an X-ray. It's applicable into a very specific clinical application, but think about mobile X-ray system that we could take from one facility to another across Africa or through a mobile unit with embedded artificial intelligence, which we can do today. And being able to treat TB diagnose TB in a very different way at scale, enabling the clinical staff, which we know we lack of in Africa, to get to a decision much earlier. That's one. We talk about aviation. We talked about GE in Africa, but we're very proud to be powering 56% of the fleet of Ethiopian Airlines in terms of aircraft engine, 90% of Kenya Airways. And I'm glad to say that Ghana, which is relaunching their own national airline, has chosen GE aircraft engine for their Dreamliner 787 that they've just ordered. So here with additive manufacturing applied to these aircraft engine, this is also something in the future that will touch Africa.
Farid, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, and of course, congratulations once again, 120 years here on the African market. I've been speaking to Farid Fzoua, his GE's president and CEO for Africa, and we'll be looking, of course, at the company's footprints across the continent. So that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch all previous episodes of the show on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also send your thoughts and your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awuni. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.